could when I was small, and it's so picturesque. Looking through the crystal ball, can you picture this?
Ciao, and welcome to Gio's Paintbrush, where 5 minutes is all it takes to be blown away by one of the world's greatest artists. Coming to grips with our own mortality has been a favorite subject of human artistic endeavor from the very beginning. Over the course of human history, religion, faith in a power not bound by the laws of nature as we are, has sought to help humankind make sense of the reality of our fragile existence and impending certain demise, that ultimate and great democratic principle that always has and always will unite people from every time and every place. No matter how we begin our lives or where we travel in our time, we all end up in the same condition eventually. Writing in a post-Great War world in which faith in a supernatural protector had been shattered shockingly by machine guns, mustard gas, and ominous zeppelins lurking above with fiery, deadly cargo, T.S. Eliot, in his poetry, called for a spiritual communion with the dead, a sort of comfort in the knowledge, at least, that no one is alone, and that we're all connected to the same cord, part of something larger than ourselves, a meaningful sharing of experience, if you will, unbroken from the beginning of time until this very moment. In today's show, we'll explore what I consider to be a physical, tangible rendering of Eliot's notion, the 12th century bone house at St. Michael's Chapel in tiny, historic Hallstatt, Austria, where over the course of centuries, village residents carefully hand-painted the skulls of loved ones for public display, and where even today, the experience of visiting leaves one both a little creeped out and thinking about death and life in new and interesting ways. Thanks for joining us. Perched on a hill overlooking the ancient and picturesque town of Hallstatt, Austria, according to Rick Steves, the gem of the beautiful Salzkammergut Lake District, located just 35 miles southeast of Salzburg, the Roman Catholic parish church, Gothic in style, was begun in the 12th century. After ascending the winding stairs that lead from Hallstatt's quaint marketplatz to the hilltop site of the church and its small cemetery, one has the sensation of being dropped, quite literally, into a landscape painted with the power and beauty, color and light of a Monet at Giverny. The views of Lake Hallstatt, the town's colorful and historic 16th century buildings, tucked precariously between the lake and the hillside, and the mountains that surround the lake, all under a high pale blue sky. The beauty is so striking, so present, that you can actually feel it, a physical sensation that overcomes you as if you've been transported to another world. But as if this experience isn't rich enough for even the most experienced of travelers, he or she also finds, right here on the same church grounds, the small 12th century chapel of St. Michael's, a Beinhaus. Translated literally from the German into English, Beinhaus means simply bone house or charnel house, a chapel containing human remains, but not flesh, only bones, and not in vaults or caskets or vessels, but displayed neatly, orderly, like the dry goods lined up and stacked row after row on shelves at so many modern-day big-box retail outlets. One is struck immediately at the care that has been taken in exhibiting these skulls and bones. The Hallstatt Beinhaus contains more than 1,200 bleached white by the sun human skulls on display and the bones to match, tucked neatly on shelves beneath them. Included in this seemingly grisly collection are 610 colorful, hand-painted skulls, thoughtfully rendered by relatives and friends of the deceased. The painting indicates the day of death and decorates the skulls with crowns of laurel for 18th century and flowers for 19th century bones, symbolizing the everlasting life and permanent state of beauty the faithful believe awaits their loved ones upon their physical demise. The laurel, in particular, seems to me an apropos symbol of how, in Christianity, death represents a final victory, not a defeat, just as Jesus' death on the cross and the resurrection that followed represented a victory of love and sacrifice over greed, hatred, and selfishness, and over death itself. While charnel houses do exist in other cultures, Italy, for example, and have for centuries, human beings have always been conscious of the fragility of life, and believers have always sought to remind one another of the need to use their time wisely on this earth to prepare for the next life. It is the painting of the skulls at Hallstatt that, to me, makes this Beinhaus so fascinating. Begun in the early 18th century, The tradition of decorating the skulls reflects three essentially human needs: the need to honor our dead by making their final resting place beautiful, the need to identify some meaning, some purpose in our mortality, to make sense of suffering and death, and finally, the need to connect somehow with those who came before us, to belong to something larger and more powerful than our own small existence, to be in communion, to use Eliot's concept, with our beginnings, our past, and through this sharing, to face an uncertain future with a sense of purpose, of security, the kind of security that comes with not being alone. I think in the 20th and 21st centuries, we continue to seek this communion with the dead, but especially in the Western world, where material objects are such an important part of our lives and histories, we do this today through mementos, through cherished family or historical artifacts that come to symbolize our connection to those who came before us. Today, loved ones are no longer waked in the parlors of our homes, and cemeteries are no longer treated as parks where picnics and other events bring us closer to our past. Today, the average American woman will live to be about 80 years old, and man about 78 years old. We're just not as close to death as we used to be. But the Hallstatt Beinhaus provides a reminder that for most of human history, this was not the case. And in the prehistoric salt mining village of Hallstatt, current archaeological evidence from around the village suggests mining began here about 7,000 years ago, and that a thriving Iron Age Celtic civilization reached its peak in Hallstatt around the 7th century BC. The history runs so long and so deep that communion with the dead, a sort of acceptance of one's meaningful place in the natural evolution of human history on Earth, one simple, useful link in the chain, well, it all seems perfectly normal here, perfectly in place, even today. That being said, to be sure, there were also quite practical reasons that drove, initially, the establishment of the Beinhaus, reasons also rooted deeply in Hallstatt's unique sense of place. Established at the base of a mountain along the edge of a lake, a site chosen, no doubt, by prehistoric peoples because of its proximity to the salt buried in the mountain, known as white gold because of its sought-after ability to preserve food, and the lake by which the valuable commodity could be transported for trade, little land could be set aside for a cemetery. And thus, until the Catholic Church began to allow cremation in the middle of the 20th century, church officials had to remove the remains of deceased from the cemetery after about every decade when the flesh was no more, and relocate them somewhere in order to make room for the newly deceased. And from that need the Beinhaus was born. Interestingly, Austria, once a mighty Eastern Empire and now a lovely, richly cultured, but geographically small modern nation, today rents graves for about 10 years for a small fee, and as soon as loved ones stop paying the fee, the remains are exhumed and the space rented anew. Today, however, the remains are cremated rather than placed in charnel houses. While this concept is especially foreign to Americans, think about how much land we possess from the Atlantic to the Pacific. It's a safe, workable solution for a culture that lacks land suitable for indefinite burial. The Hallstatt Beinhaus, part warning to believers that they best devote themselves in this life to preparing to meet their Maker in the next, because one day we'll all end up a pile of bones. Part expression of the basic human need to understand our own mortality and to identify our place in the larger story of human endeavor, to gain the comfort that comes with communion with those who preceded us, and with accepting our shared experience and fate. And finally, part practical solution to a threat to public health and a shortage of land, suitable for indefinite burial in the traditional manner. Standing in the chapel of St. Michael's, one is not only surrounded by hundreds of human skulls and bones, but also by the entirety of human experience on this planet. And after the creepiness wears off, it's awe-inspiring. As is often the case with powerful art, and to me, the Beinhaus is performance art starring the dead. The Hallstatt charnel house is startling, shocking, disturbing, thought-provoking, moving, solemn, and strangely comforting, all at the same time. It's a type of performance art in which we're all destined to play a role someday, and it's this universality, the uniquely human experience of pondering one's purpose and ultimate fate in this world, and perhaps in the next, that lends it such power. It's a one-of-a-kind experience in a one-of-a-kind town. Grazie mille e ciao.
I can picture it like I could when I was small, and it's so picturesque. looking through